At long last, after years of production, cancelled theatrical runs, and a full-on leak, Avatar Aang: The Last Airbender has been officially released. To say this is a highly anticipated film would be an insane understatement. I don't need to tell you how beloved the series is, and we haven't gotten any animated media set in this world in over a decade. We have gotten non-animated media, but we don't talk about that here. But with such a long wait comes high expectations, and it's always going to be hard to please everyone with the follow-up to a beloved classic. So how is Avatar Aang: The Last Airbender? Personally, I thought it was pretty darn good. Not perfect, but it gave me so much to be excited about. Avatar is probably my favorite fictional universe of all time, and honestly, I'm just so happy to be back in this world. But the thing I really want to focus on in this video is unpacking Aang's personal journey in this story with some heavy character analysis. But before that, I have so much I want to go over, so the first part of this video will be more general thoughts returning to these characters all these years later before we dive headfirst into the Aang analysis. And hey, if you like this breakdown, stay tuned, because as an Avatar fanatic, I plan to finally unleash a huge slate of Avatar and Korra videos between now and leading into the release of Avatar 7 Havens in October. In fact, I did a 22-minute breakdown of 7 Havens teaser just a couple days ago, so please check that out. I am fully Avatar pilled again, folks. Join me on this journey. Okay, so just as general thoughts go, I thought this was a mostly very strong and fun return to the world of Avatar. The animation is truly astounding, just absolutely out of this world. Seeing how lovingly animated this revival was all these years later shows how much care and adoration went into the task. All the delays were because they were taking this seriously. I cannot believe how good this thing looks, and I hope that we get to see something else in the franchise animated on this level again in the future. Obviously, the leak situation really could put that in jeopardy, but for the time being, the creators and Avatar Studios seem to remain confident that we'll be seeing a lot more of their slate in the future. And speaking of, what an absolute shame the way Paramount has treated this film. I was lucky enough to actually get to see it in a theater, and let me tell you, that is the way it was meant to be seen. I'm hoping that the success of the very limited theatrical run will lead to them expanding it further, but it's all just such a shame that it was pulled from the theaters in the first place. The music is once again exemplary. I cannot overstate how much I love Jeremy Zuckerman's work on this franchise. Obviously, his tracks for The Last Airbender are incredible, but I also think his score for Legend of Korra might even be better, and he continues his streak here with some truly breathtaking new tracks. In particular, the new theme found in Bond That Tethers has got to be one of my favorite compositions in the entire franchise, and I'll talk about that a little more in depth in some of the more specific analysis later as well, because I really loved how it was used. With all those positives, and many more to come in the analysis section, I promise, I do feel like I see and understand how this film might take adjusting for some fans of the original series. For one, a film is just an entirely different beast than a show like Last Airbender, particularly from a pacing and character perspective, where a full season of TV gives us more time to sit with individual characters and slow burn the introduction of plot elements and lore. This 98-minute feature film feels like it moves a lot faster, and that's probably because it does, and I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. It is just an adjustment. On top of that, it is pretty clear that Avatar Studios made the decision to really put the focus on Aang in this film. I mean, are you surprised? The title is Avatar Aang: The Last Airbender, but he is the one character who really gets a fully fleshed out and satisfying character journey, whereas the rest of Team Avatar kind of slots in as supporting players. And I know that might feel disappointing to fans who waited so long to see these characters again all these years later. I really do understand that. But I also think that trying to fit in substantial character arcs for every returning player in a 98-minute film definitely could have made it all feel a little overstuffed and undercooked. I personally really appreciate that they gave us a very robust story for Aang while providing every other Team Avatar character with, to use a term I have no business using, hype moments and aura. It also seems like this is an indicator of what their plans are/were for the characters moving forward. I think the Avatar Studios slate probably included additional films or projects focused on the young adult Aang gang, with this film acting as the reintroduction to the characters for this new time period. There was that heavily rumored Zuko movie, which didn't make a ton of sense to me until I watched this film. It made me realize that giving individual characters the spotlight in different projects actually could really work, presuming they do end up being able to produce any of these projects in the future. I would love to see a few films that allow different Team Avatar members to shine, but also, if features aren't in the cards for them anymore moving forward, maybe streaming specials, miniseries, or honestly just a continuation of the gang at this era of their lives in a show. Okay, speaking speaking of Team Avatar, let's talk about the voice acting elephant in the room. Every single character has been recast. This was something we knew would happen going into the project. It's definitely caused a lot of controversy, and I know it can be very difficult for people to accept new voices for existing beloved characters. They are on record as saying this was made in an attempt to be more conscientious of the ethnicities of the characters being portrayed, though I am still a bit confused as to why they weren't able to keep Dante Bosco as Zuko, as he has Filipino heritage, but it is what it is. All that being said, how did the new voice cast do? Personally, I think more good than bad, but still it is a tough adjustment. Eric Nam's Aang doesn't quite sound like Zach Tyler Eisen, but to me he sounds like a believably aged up version of the character, and I really think his performance shines in key scenes. Roman Zaragoza and Dion Kwan, to me, are absolutely top tier, knocked it out of the park, incredible matches for Sokka and Toph, taking over the roles from Jack DeSena and Michaela Jill Murphy. Really, I just have no complaints about them. I think this is about as great of an aged up recast as you can possibly have. They both not only sounded like the characters I loved and remembered, but really embodied their spirit as well. Jessica Matten as Katara, I had a little bit more trouble with. I really thought she did an admirable job sounding like Katara, but I think in really honing in on that sound, we maybe lost a bit of the passion and spark that makes Mae Whitman's performance so memorable. Some line deliveries just felt a bit stilted, though I will say in certain sequences, I thought she really did find that passion and spark that I wanted more of, and I hope that given more opportunities to voice the character, she might really settle into the role. And then the curious case of Steven Yeun as Fire Lord Zuko. Now, as I mentioned earlier, this casting particularly bothered me because I just didn't see any reason to recast Dante Bosco. On top of that, Bosco has such a unique voice that it would of course be particularly difficult to replace him, and as much as I love Steven Yeun as an actor and voice actor, I really do think the similarities to Zuko are a bit too minimal. They're there, but they're minimal. And I actually think Yeun sort of sounds younger than Bosco. I also think it's weird to cast him as Zuko when he is already Avatar 1, one of the most important figures in Avatar lore. However, it wasn't necessarily that this was a bad performance. Yeun is an outstanding voice actor, and I do think that given the right material and a bit more substance, he probably could give a Zuko performance that really wins me over, simply by virtue of being a great actor. He honestly didn't have a ton to work with in this film, so if they do move forward with that rumored Zuko movie, we would obviously get a much better look at his version of Zuko. But overall, despite not being entirely on board with the new voices, I am happy to say that I didn't find any of them too distracting from what I felt was a very solid story and re-entry into this universe. Though the story and arc weren't overly complex, I think it was the exact thing they needed to explore in Aang's life post-series. And this is where I really want to start diving into the plot of this film and why I think it was an outstanding follow-up for Aang as a character. Obviously, Avatar: The Last Airbender is really focused on a more immediate threat. They spell it out very plainly: master all the elements before Sozin's comet comes and put an end to the 100-Year War. This is the primary story arc of the series. Yes, there are also all kinds of smaller character arcs baked within, but one thing that obviously was never going to be fully resolved is Aang's trauma. The genocide of the air nomads and the guilt he feels for abandoning them before they would ultimately be killed, that isn't something that a 12-year-old boy is just gonna get over. And so returning to the franchise with an Aang-focused storyline where he has to more directly confront that trauma was the perfect decision. And I actually think on watching and rewatching this film, it's clear that every single story beat and set piece aids in exploring this journey. Obviously, the film starts with this nightmare flashback dream sequence set back at the Southern Air Temple as Aang races his friends on their gliders, only for Gyatso to jump on his glider, making him lose the race. Not surprisingly, the lesson Gyatso teaches him here is vital to the story ahead. Even if you have the power to win, you are the Avatar. A lot of people are going to rely on you. The dream then devolves into fiery chaos, just the trauma and guilt Aang feels over knowing his culture was destroyed in his absence. It's pretty scary, and I think a smart way to show that this is still really troubling and weighing on Aang. The movie at its core is about how, though Aang is helping usher the world forward into this new era, he really cannot fully do that while he still hangs on to the guilt of his past. And even just what he is doing here in these opening sequences are indicative of that mindset. Aang is on this solo journey with Appa and Momo, hunting down air nomad relics and spending all of his time at the Southern Air Temple, his old home. Though they are already 1 year into the founding of Republic City, Aang is still committing all of this time in the ruins of his old life. And this is illustrated pretty immediately by the fact that Aang misses the opening ceremony of Unity Tower in Republic City, the tower that literally represents represents unification of the nations, and the Avatar, the representation of balance in the world, missed it because he is still so guilt-ridden, holding on to that aspect of his history. And to be clear, I do think that this is a completely understandable way to cope with that trauma all these years later, and I really think this franchise is most interesting when it's about a person overcoming their personal baggage to learn to be a better Avatar, and this is exemplified in this film. I think some of the best sequences are these slower, quieter, dialogue-driven scenes. Aang opening up to Katara here, revealing all of this added pressure of being the last remnant of air nomad culture, that the possibility of his death is a lot scarier to him than just death. It represents the loss of all that came before. He already feels that guilt, feeling like he failed his people, but even worse is the idea of dying before he can ever make it right. And this movie is largely about what making it right looks like. I think it was very smart that they show how, though Republic City's founding and the way it begins to flourish are super exciting for these characters, it's also one of the things that is making Aang look back with regret. All of the nations live here together, all except mine. This city represents the unity between nations, and so the absence of the air nomads is a constant reminder for Aang. The big driving force of this film is an initially mysterious airbender named Sonam. This group of non-benders called the Denied steal a map she left behind and are seeking what we eventually learn to be a staff filled with immense power harnessed from the spirit world, which is rumored to have been left at the top of Mount Bayou. Even the way that Aang chooses to approach this mission is very indicative of his mindset at this moment and his struggles to fully embrace the life he has ahead of him, hanging on to that past. He chooses to send messages to recruit the rest of Team Avatar rather than wait for them or gather them himself, while he heads to Mount Bayou alone, where he should be embracing his found family that he chose to rebuild the world with moving forward. He instead goes chasing the remnants of his lost culture alone once again. I'm just very impressed that though this film is largely jumping from major action set piece to major action set piece, its storytelling is pretty economical. You can derive so much about the characters and themes just from how these set pieces are approached and where they sit within the larger context of the story. Aang's scaling of Mount Bayou, I think, also works really well in the same way. Aang is so committed to carrying this burden alone, and though his scaling feat is wildly impressive, it was incredibly difficult and he kind of just barely made it up. If he had waited for his friends, he could have just flown up there with Appa or with Zuko's Fire Nation ship. This movie is filled with these little allegorical story beats that represent what Aang needs to learn. He doesn't need to hang on to the past alone, and he's worse off for doing so. But the discovery of Taga atop Mount Bayou is where this story gets really interesting. For one, just an outstanding performance from Dave Bautista and a really fascinating character, but most important is that Taga is this sort of mirror held up to Aang, another airbender who was time displaced, who also lost his people in war, who also holds on to that guilt. Someone Aang can directly relate to in his feelings of grief and guilt. But even in his introduction, within this insane set piece, as Aang tries to save Taga's unconscious body as they plummet down the partially collapsing Mount Bayou, we get some outstanding character storytelling through Taga's first actions as a bender. Obviously, the airbenders we know through the franchise, and particularly Aang's air nomad upbringing, they are a culture who avoids confrontation. The airbending style we see the most of involves reading the opponent, avoiding attacks, taking advantage when openings present themselves, and we even see that from Aang here in how he is attempting to save Taga. But the moment Taga wakes up, we see something different from his airbending. He directly launches an insanely powerful blast of air at the collapsing mountain, standing his ground and confronting the issue ahead, not something we typically see from airbenders, and an early indicator that though there are all of these commonalities between himself and Aang's circumstance, they seem to actually be very different from a cultural and philosophical angle. And I think a lot of this difference in approach could initially be chalked up to learning more about the time from which Taga lived, and I really love the flashbacks to that era, the era of Avatar Sonam. Taga describes it as the golden age of airbenders, in which they had this utopic city called Jurana. On my first watch, my initial thought was just, well, if this was the golden age of air nomads, it must have been the peak of airbending abilities as well. And to a degree, that is true, but as we'll also see, it ultimately has to do with the war developments in that era, and this confrontational airbending approach should have been a little bit more of a red flag off the bat. But even with this knowledge, it's hard not to feel the hope in Aang when he learns that Sonam's staff could grant people airbending again. I love that he just runs out of the tent hyperventilating, and it's so representative of the weight of his guilt that there could be this magical solution that will will undo what he sees as his biggest mistake. And obviously this is also just a majorly important aspect of his story here. This idea that Aang could have this get out of guilt free card, something that just magically erases the pain of his trauma, a solution that has him sitting firmly in his past instead of looking forward to his future. But as I said before, as outstanding as the action is in this film, my favorite scenes are the quieter, character-driven dialogue scenes. And these conversations between Aang and Taga are maybe the best. Aang hasn't spoken to an airbender in over a decade. Well, technically over a century, but as far as his perception of time goes, he has experienced about 13 years without having been able to talk to another air nomad. And getting to actually open up to Taga about the airbender genocide, about his guilt in abandoning them after he learned he was the Avatar. It's this huge step in trying to unburden himself from that grief, despite the guilt he feels admitting it to him. And I cannot say enough about how much I love Taga reciting Sonam's air nomad mantra here. Air nomads are formed from the mist. We walk the world for a moment in time, then we return to the eternal wind. Chills, man. And Aang was taught this same mantra from Monk Gyatso. I find Taga reminding Aang of this to be so beautiful, particularly at this point as he really grapples with that grief. It allows Aang to take a step back and look at everyone's existence in a broader context, that despite the tragedy befallen the air nomads, we all only exist on this planet for a short time in the scheme of things, and that even Aang will one day join them again when he returns to the eternal wind. And what follows this is my actual favorite scene in the film. Taga offers to teach Aang an airbending technique from his time. For one, I love the idea that some of these bending techniques come and go with different cultures and through different eras. And of course, there would be some wildly impressive skills from the golden age of airbenders. But I also love that this is specifically a technique that can only be achieved with 2 or more airbenders, as they tether themselves to each other with airbending and continually propel each other through the air higher and higher. They are each other's engines. It is a beautiful display of brotherhood as these 2 airbenders from entirely different eras who have both lost their entire culture show off what is possible together, despite what lies ahead for them. This is the scene with that piece of score I adore, Bond That Tethers, and it puts such a beautiful exclamation on those feelings Aang is having. Like there is truly hope for him to bring his culture back and move it into the future. But we also get these little red flags from Taga hinting that he doesn't think highly of the other bending cultures. Initial fear in seeing Toph earthbend and condescension towards Katara, calling her a water child. It's clear that though he and Aang have these commonalities and a shared trauma, they occupy very different headspaces about the world. And while Aang is connecting with Taga through airbending culture, he still pushes back on his attitudes towards other nations and reaffirms his commitment to the dream of Republic City and unity. And I think this is pretty important. Though Aang is ridden with guilt and grief and it causes him to make rash decisions in this film, it's not like he ever fully loses sight of what is important. He just struggles to reconcile those 2 titles he holds. One, Avatar Aang, and the other, The Last Airbender. Coincidentally, both are the title of this film. So much of this journey is Aang's struggle to uphold those Avatar duties while holding on to the weight of being the last airbender. The following set piece actually showcases this conflict perfectly in how it's constructed, as the Denied attack Zuko's airship through the Everstorm, one of the coolest sequences in the film. For one, we see how ruthless and powerful Taga is, nearly killing the Denied and destroying their ships, but it's the rest that showcases where Aang's heart is in this moment. Aang is no longer flying solo as he was in those previous action sequences. This time, he is all in with Taga as they propel themselves with that airbending tethering technique to dispel the tornadoes. But while this is happening, the airship is barely holding on and the rest of Team Avatar scrambles and struggles at every step to prevent the ship from crashing into the sea. It is tense and honestly a little insane. Toph desperately tries to metal bend the ship's hull back together. Zuko blasts the furnace with as much firebending as he can. Sokka steers the ship while it is fully vertical by running on the wheel, and Katara essentially parts the sea and prevents them from fully crashing, easing the ship across the water before they're able to lift it back into the air. It takes everything they have, and it takes teamwork and unity amongst a wide array of skills and bending abilities to achieve their goal, a pretty apt little metaphor for what Aang and the gang are trying to achieve via their Republic City dreams. But Aang, he was with Taga. He was looking at the steps needed to get to that staff to try and bring back the Airbenders. And honestly, his friends could have died. Katara could have died here. This was one of the worst examples of Aang being blinded by the promise of bringing back the air nomads and ignoring what his found family needed from him. And rightfully, Katara tells off Aang in this moment for leading them into such a dangerous situation. This is a clearer example and kind of the crux of Aang's conflict in this film, making these rash, dangerous decisions rooted in his grief and regret, while his loved ones suffer the consequences. But they arrive at these lion turtle corpse islands where the staff resides and temporarily split as Aang pursues the staff and the rest of the gang fixes up the ship, and this leads to Katara's confrontation with Taga and the big kind of predictable turn. This confrontation is the scene where I thought we got some of that passion and spark from Katara that I really wanted more of. There's some real emotion coming through in her pleas here, but the following sequence is nuts. As Aang discovers the staff, the entire gang fights and falls to Taga. There's a moment here that is sort of the snap back to reality moment for Aang. He and Taga hold the staff, and Taga implies the deadly fate of Aang's friends. So far, Aang has been so blinded by the possibility of bringing back the Airbenders that he didn't even consider he could lose the life that he had built here. That in trying to fix his past mistakes, he actually could be heading right into a circumstance where he makes the same mistake again. One where he loses all that he holds most dear. I loved that they basically parallel Aang's reaction here with what we see early in the very first season of the show, when Aang discovers Gyatso's corpse at the Southern Air Temple. Once he realizes that Katara may be dead, he just goes full terrifying Avatar state, fueled by the overwhelming grief and shock. I really hate when debates about the show become about power scaling, because it feels like it just kind of misses every point the show is ever trying to make. But I do find this fight really fascinating from that power scaling point of view. Taga is already a super buffed up airbender. His chi is off the charts according to Katara, and here he also has the staff now, which clearly is an advantage and holds power itself. Not even Avatar state Aang could handle staff Taga, though I do think his grief also probably hindered him a bit. I've seen a lot of harsh criticism thrown at Aang for trusting Taga over his friends, but guys, that's what this movie is about. It's about how that kind of trauma and grief and regret and guilt blinds us from the truth of the present, how it keeps us looking back, asking what if. Aang is desperately trying to solve a tragedy that can't be undone. His mistakes are rooted in his trauma and shortcomings as a character, and that is what makes this story worth telling. Also, kind of crazy that we've seen Aang full on die twice in this franchise now. Pretty big mistake, twice. But I really appreciated the next sequence as Aang speaks with Sonam and learns the full context of Taga's role in her era. This backstory feels understandably a bit rushed in delivery, but there's so much to dig into lore-wise. Here, I want to focus on Taga, because I love that this reveals just how parallel his journey is with Aang's, but also that there are key differences. We learned that Taga essentially watched all of his Air Nation brethren be slaughtered in the war with the Earth Kingdom, and that experience hardened him. And even just considering how Aang reacted when he found Gyatso's body, I think it's clear that literally witnessing these atrocities and tragedies would absolutely change you so substantially. In a way, Aang is lucky that he didn't have to witness it. They have these parallel experiences, but where Taga turned to vengeance, Aang sought comfort in his newfound family. And that really made all the difference and helps fortify the themes of this film. That in isolation, these wounds fester, whether that's an isolated person or an isolated nation. Now, obviously, Aang wasn't going to stay dead, but it is insane that Taga straight up killed every member of Team Avatar. Fortunately, the Spirit Waters revived Katara, who then was able to revive the rest of them, and I really just loved seeing the gang embrace each other here, forecasting Aang's realization of who and what is most important in his life. I will say, this next slight stretch is probably the part of the film I have the most issue with. I did think it was cool seeing the Ocean Spirit return, who they use as a portal to get in the spirit world, but also it just kind of felt like a very quick fan servicey cameo. There was never any real indication that he could be a portal into the spirit world before, so I wasn't sure it entirely meshed with the lore, but I mean, look at him. He looks so dope. It's hard to complain. But the initial spirit world sequence, that's where I really struggled. A lot of the humor here didn't really land for me, and I felt like it sort of took the wind out of the sails of the film heading into the third act. It was really well animated, and I guess it was kind of fun to see these characters characters at different ages again, but I think it slowed it down in a way that did more harm than good. I would have preferred if just entering the spirit world, they went straight into the events of the climax, which is exactly what I'm gonna do here. Even just in its construction, this climax sequence totally represents the conflict of the film, doesn't it? The lost city of Jorana, the airbending city, coming down and crushing Republic City, placing that airbending history quite literally above the unification of all nations. It is Aang's conflict and it is Taga's vision. The Aang gang do get some pretty hype moments in these final fight sequences. Toph in particular gets just an outrageously cool look and fight here. And I also like that they're fighting these staff-infused airbending members of the Denied. I think it was pretty smart to make these enemies like temporarily super buffed by the power of the staff. Makes it so they're not just fighting a bunch of scrubs. I think one of my issues with Sokka in this film is that it felt like he was a bit relegated to comic relief. He did do a lot of really impressive things, but they all kind of happened comedically. And I wish he had gotten some real leadership-focused moments in the narrative, but despite this, I did appreciate the payoff to his Sokka cycle bit in regards to the Denied. Characters who felt less than because of their lack of bending being shown that they can actually be bested by a non-bender. It is a bit clunky, and I think that if it had been a bit longer, or if this had been like a mini-series, this connection probably would have been hit more effectively, but I appreciated the attempt. The other thing I'm not a huge fan of is the design of the staff/temple powered up spirit Taga. I like the idea that his grief and anger combined with the staff's power corrupts him into something that is barely even recognizable as an airbender. That just hits the themes perfectly, doesn't it? But I think that from a design standpoint, he felt a little too cartoony for me, but it barely mattered because the action and emotion behind all of this was so effective for me. I particularly loved this devastating visual as Aang looks down at burning Republic City, almost certainly overcome with the fear that his new home is facing the same fate as his old one. And everything comes back around here. Aang specifically uses the airbending tethering technique to save himself, flinging Taga back and stealing the staff. I mean, who doesn't love when a hero uses an ability against the person who taught them that ability? That's just a good action trope. But as Aang powers himself up with the staff, I think this resolves on a personal level just so beautifully. He now has the staff. He has the upper hand on Taga. He could win the day and bring back the airbenders. But just like Taga, in this powered up spirit state, he too starts to let that grief and regret and anger corrupt him. In trying to save his culture, he starts to lose the traits that are emblematic of his culture. In trying to undo the tragedy that befell the air nomads, he is inherently leaning into vengeance and violence. This ties into Gyatso's lesson in the opening scene. Even if you have the power to win, you are the avatar. A lot of people are going to rely on you, which leads perfectly into another beautiful vision. As Aang sees all his childhood friends run into the distance, even a young version of himself, they disappear, becoming one with the eternal wind. This Gyatso line is one of my favorite parts of the film. You must be prepared to do what frightens you the most. Your people, your home, we are always with you. And so Aang does what frightens him most. He lets go of his grief and regret and his desperation to undo his biggest mistake, and he breaks the staff, knowing that his people will always be a part of him. And I just think this final sequence is maybe the most effective in the entire film, as Aang and Taga float with Jorana into the sky. Batista gives just a particularly outstanding performance here. It's our duty to protect our people, not at the cost of betraying everything they stood for. And as Taga fades back into the eternal wind himself, both he and Aang forgive themselves as they recite Sonam's mantra. This really makes me so emotional. It's so well executed. I love the detail that Aang is falling faster than his tears as he watches the only airbender he's known in his adult life fade into the wind. I know this movie has that prequel aspect where if you've seen The Legend of Korra, you know that Taga and the airbenders can't stick around. But to me, that doesn't really matter. It's about the characters. This is arguably the most important moment in Aang's life thus far, the thing that allows him to pull himself out of the past and instead carry his history with him into the future. And I think these final sequences are just such a stunning emotional cherry on top of this film sundae. Aang recognizing that he can teach the air nomad culture to those who are interested, leading to the construction of Republic City's first Air Temple, the true completion of Republic City, now representing all 4 nations. It's something we knew was going to happen, but it's how and when it happens that has the emotional impact. Which brings us to the final beat, which again, Sonam tells Aang about a specific location from Airbender history, and there, he and his new air acolytes discover a herd of sky bison. We knew they would return by the era of Korra, but we never knew how it happened. Appa's face as he sees more of his kind for the first time in so long. It's so good. But what makes it so effective for me are 2 combined aspects here. It is that the moment Aang let go and forgave himself and moved on from this fantasy that he could somehow undo his mistakes and bring back the Airbenders, they happen across the original Airbenders. And as they fly off into the sky with the entire herd behind them, that same music cue from Bond That Tethers plays. The one that represented the bond and brotherhood Aang felt with Taga. With another Airbender, he's now feeling it with the original Airbenders. It's an absolutely perfect ending. I cannot overstate how much I adore it. I know this movie in some ways feels like filler between series, simply by its nature of being like a pre-sequel, but I truly think this is an absolutely vital journey for Aang, arguably the most important in his entire story, and I think the franchise is much better for having explored it. Its lingering trauma from the original series beautifully explored, pushing Aang into his adulthood and making him a richer and deeper character. The more I watch this movie, the more I love it for the ways it explores Aang. Man, I love Avatar. All right, before I go, there is a bunch of just like lore and world building stuff I want to dig into and really geek out about. First up, I just really loved seeing this early version of Republic City, which obviously is a major location in Legend of Korra. I was really hoping that Unity Tower was actually something we could actually see in the Republic City skyline in Korra, but it does seem to have been originally created for this film, which is totally fine. It had major thematic significance and looks great as the centerpiece of the early version of the city. Plus, the skyscrapers start to get a lot bigger in the future, but I would really love to see further evolution of Republic City between eras if other projects allow it. Speaking of evolution from this film to Republic City, let's talk about The Denied. I do think that overall The Denied are a bit underdeveloped, but that clear parallel to the Equalists in season 1 of Korra really intrigues me. It's very interesting to see that this feeling of injustice and inequality from non-benders towards benders was already an issue this early in Republic City's existence. Clearly one of the things that Avatar Aang did not seem to fully address during his tenure. We also got to see a handful of new designs for older avatars when Aang was seeking information about Sonam. Though this first design that we see after Roku, she actually comes from Legend of Korra in the season 1 finale. There's that one group shot of tons of avatars and she is right smack dab in the middle of them. She's a female Fire Nation avatar. Cool to see them pull from the archives for that. But these new designs for earthbending, waterbending, and airbending avatars were all pretty cool as well. This air nomad has some great eyebrows. But let's talk about Avatar's Xi'an. Overall, I thought some of the humor in this scene went on a bit long, but oh boy do I love that we now have a canonical Avatar that's just a weird little guy. Honestly, with the premise of this franchise being predicated on the existence of all of these different avatars, it's actually really refreshing to see one who doesn't look like your traditional hero type. No reason all avatars need to be buff, superhero looking characters. An idea that I am certainly not the first to pitch that I have always hoped to see from Avatar Studios is an anthology series that does one-off episodes and stories focused on various different avatars across the timeline. Not only would this just be an awesome way to explore different avatars, eras, and stories, but it would also basically allow them to make backdoor pilots for new Avatar series, comics, books, etc. See what new avatars really pop and what ones the fans respond to. An Avatar incubator, you know? It could also allow us to at least get some animated stories for the other avatars that fans already know and appreciate. Kyoshi, Yang Chen, Wan. Feels like a no-brainer to me. Hell, how about more stories for Avatar Sonam, which, hey, let's talk about her next. I am fascinated by Avatar Sonam and the golden era of air nomads. For one, this isn't too focused on in the film, but Jurana is canonically in the same exact location as Republic City, which is crazy lore. These are the exact mountains surrounding the city, and of course it makes the climax where Jurana was crushing Republic City from the spirit world make a little bit more sense geographically. But I also am super interested in the air nomads as these like peacekeepers between nations in this time. It's a bit reminiscent of how the new Air Nation evolved in season 4 of Legend of Korra, and I like the idea that some of these societal roles come and go in different cycles, even if they're not necessarily connected. But this era also seems to be the rise of the Earth Kingdom. This is like a massive piece of world history for the Avatar world. For one, it seems that the Earth Kingdom was fully founded through violent takeover and war. That's interesting. And that the land where Republic City sits apparently has a long history of being annexed, stolen, or repurposed. Now let's just look back as far as our knowledge takes us about this location. Initially, it is not just an air nomad settlement, but a massive city. Then, after Jirana was placed in the spirit world and the Earth Kingdom rose to power, they seemingly took over this land for thousands of years. Then, during the 100-Year War, the Fire Nation annexed this land and founded colonies. And then, after the 100-Year War, those colonies are what Aang and Zuko ultimately ended up turning into Republic City. It's kind of a fascinating history of just this one location in the Avatar world. But also seeing that Sonam basically died during the rise of the Earth Kingdom, I would love to learn how her successor deals with this massive power shift in the world. Okay, let's talk about lion turtles. Because man, I think the biggest lore-based hoot and or holler I let out was when they got to the Lion Turtle Corpse Islands. What a bomb of lore. Obviously, we know from Last Airbender and Korra that there were once many lion turtles. In the era of Wan, humans lived on them before retreating into the spirit wilds and occupying the world. In the time of Aang, there seems to be one single living lion turtle remaining, that we know of at least. But it also really makes me wonder when the lion turtles started to dwindle and who the last avatar to actually interact with them was. I'm not entirely clear on the timeline or specifics, but Taga claimed that these corpse islands are where Sonam came to learn their ways when she built the staff. However, in the lore flashback when Sonam describes this, they show her interacting with 4 living lion turtles. I think just going on visuals, we should presume that Sonam did interact with the lion turtles directly, but I guess that just means that even while living, they sort of just hung out in the eye of the Everstorm. I guess I'm also just trying to figure out if there were any corpses already here in Sonam's time, or if they were all still living at that point. She seems to have hidden the staff on a lion turtle corpse, but I guess it is also possible that she maybe hid the staff on a living lion turtle that then later died and was laid to rest here in the eye of the Everstorm. I really hope that at some point they choose to explore an era between Wan and Sonam that showcases how the lion turtle relationship to humanity changed and evolved. I just want to know more. I also loved that some of the things established in the Avatar comics carried over into the film, namely Toph's Metalbending Academy and even specific students who were introduced back in The Promise, the first graphic novel trilogy. Ho-Ten and this guy who has a long-ass name canonically but goes by The Dark One have really great designs in the film, and it was just cool to see those guys fully realized in the movie after being introduced in the comics. I know they generally want to keep everything in the universe congruent, but they've also said that if they need to adjust or fudge or retcon small details from comics or books to make new animated projects stronger, they aren't opposed, and I do think this is the right move. Being pigeonholed into a comic decision can be tough when trying to write a show or movie, and I'd rather that the animated content be the priority in the franchise. But it will be especially interesting if we do get that rumored Zuko movie, since the big lingering Zuko thread from the show was his mother, and that story was told in the Search trilogy. I don't think you can really do a Zuko movie without addressing this pretty specifically, considering the end of the original show, so I'm curious if they do flashbacks or a recap to tell that story, or retell parts of it through the narrative. Obviously, I had a lot to love about this film. Despite some issues and notes here and there, I think the ultimate takeaway for me is that you can see their struggle to adjust from the series format to the movie format. This was a 90-minute movie with an entire mini-series worth of ideas in it, and so a lot of those ideas ended up being relegated to background dressing as it focused on Aang's story. I just think this world is so big and teeming with endless possibility, and the creatives have had a hard time not wanting to explore as many of those possibilities as they can, and in a movie, they may have to reel it in a bit more in the future, but I am just so hopeful that despite everything, the release of this film will be enough of a success that they can move forward with the next films they developed. They said they have a script they're excited about and are waiting to see how this does, so I don't know. If you have Paramount Plus, just run this thing on repeat, please. The more I watch this movie, the more I really, really love it. The things I brush up against soften, and the things I adore about it just get stronger and stronger. I am so beyond excited to be back in this world. If you did enjoy it, please stick around. I have that Avatar 7 Havens teaser breakdown, and I am for sure going to be covering that show extensively as it releases, and I have a bunch of other Avatar character and lore videos I really want to release in between. I think the first I'm aiming for is a super comprehensive character analysis of Korra. But obviously, let me know how this movie felt for you. Did it live up to the hype? Did you enjoy returning to this world? What do you want to see from Avatar next? Let me know below in the comments, and stay tuned for so much more. Peace.
I stay mellow watching Johnny two cellos. He talks cartoons, he's a really cool fellow. He keeps you posted on adult cartoons. If that's what you're into, then grab a spoon and a very big bowl of your favorite cereal. Feels like Saturday morning cartoon material. Johnny two cellos, watch him on YouTube. Now enjoy this groove and bust a move.